So welcome everyone to our monthly webinar series organised by the IUCN's UK Education and Communications Working Group. My name is Sophie Stenson. I'm the chair of the CEC Working Group and will be chairing the webinar tonight. This is the fourth in our webinar series so far, and we have been lucky enough to host some brilliant speakers covering topics of nature education for sustainability and youth engagement. So if any of those sound like they're up your street, you can find the recordings on our website, which I will also share in the link in the chat shortly. We also have some exciting webinars coming up. So the next of which will host Jessie Panazzolo, who is the founder of the Lonely Conservationists. If you haven't heard of it already, it's a fantastic online community that advocates for better mental health and support for conservationists. So we'll be talking about support for people who work in conservation, and we'll also be confirming a second speaker very soon. So to keep up with news about upcoming webinars and other events, you can follow us on our social media channels by searching IUCN NCUK or by signing up for free as a CEC member to join our mailing lists. So without further ado, this evening we will be discussing where is wildlife conservation going and do zoos have any part in it? I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker for the evening, Simon Garrett. Simon has worked in education and public engagement for over 30 years at the Bristol Zoological Society and with the Natural History Consortium, including in developing the annual Communicate conference and leading a master's module on communication for conservation. One of his main interests is understanding the drivers of human behaviour and using communication as a tool for wildlife conservation. So I'll hand over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Sophie. The reason I put my first slide up straight away is I hope you've all kind of had a bit of a read of it, because I am going to skim over an awful lot of things in the next, I'm going to aim for 53 minutes to allow time for some questions afterwards, or possibly even more. And I'm sure I'll be talking about things that make you think, make you begin to question things you thought you knew, or I may say things that upset you or you disagree with. But I'd like you to go with it, and then obviously we can discuss with questions at the end. So off we go. I'm going to show you a picture first of all of well, taking a massive step back. Here we've got one of the marvelous pictures coming out from the James Webb Space Telescope. And this is really just thinking, I mean, some people could say, well, the Earth is going to get swallowed up by the sun when it expands in about 1 billion years' time anyway. So to be honest, it doesn't really matter what we do with the Earth, because in the big scheme of things, it's going to get swallowed up by the sun anyway. However, there may be another way of thinking about it. Here is a picture of the Earth. You're thinking this is not a picture of the Earth, this is a picture of Saturn. The Earth is in this picture, it's basically that tiny dot there. So I just wanted to take a big step back first of all and think about the incredibleness of the fact that this is the only place, as far as we know, in the universe that has life on it. So if you're what should we say? If you could take one extreme view and say it doesn't matter what we do with the planet, because in 1 billion years it's going to get blown up by the sun anyway. Or you could take the other view and say, actually, this is extraordinary that this is the only place in this entire universe that we know of that has life on it. So we really ought to look after it. And as you can see, when you look from the outside, I'd love to be an astronaut and look back on the planet. Just very thin skin of biodiversity and atmosphere around this rock floating through space. So I just thought I'd start with that massive context, because why not? Now let's zoom right into some closer timescales. And I'm going to start being a little bit critical, but just go with it, go with me. We've had conservation organisations in this country and around the world for a very long time. RSPB set up in 1889. So we've had people and organisations in this country and around the world, large and small, focused on saving wildlife for a very, very long time. However, if you look at the graphs that come out every 2 years in the ZSL WWF report, the Living Planet report, now I could do entire lectures on this graph, but I won't. In general, we are losing wildlife. This is actually to do with losing populations of vertebrates, not losing species, but losing actual biomass. And if you just look at the moment, because of wild isles being on as well, the state of nature as well in the UK, whichever way we look at it, we are losing biodiversity. So we've got this crazy situation where we have an awful lot of people and organizations that are dedicated to preserving biodiversity and looking after nature, and yet something is going wrong because we're not managing it. Now, at the moment, I hope you've been watching Wild Isles. That's an amazing focus on UK wildlife at the moment. So we have the National Trust and WWF and RSPB, between them having 8.5 million voices for nature. And so again, we really ought to be able to do something about getting this country at least back on track. So on my phone, this is a screen grab from my phone probably a week or so ago now. 3 of Britain's biggest conservation charities are joining forces to try to halt the destruction of UK nature. Hooray! 8.5 million members, brilliant. And from the poll that went along with this, 76% of people in the UK are worried about the condition of nature. So people are worried about it. There's organisations there to help. Obviously, it's going to be straightforward and simple, therefore, to sort it, isn't it? All I need to know is what to do. So I was very pleased when also on my phone, when I clicked through from the website, here, together we can save our wild isles. Excellent. So I click on Act Now because that's what I want to do. Now, I don't expect you to read this. It's not designed for you to read. This is just long scrolling screen grabs from my phone. But here we go. Love nature, act now. Be the first to hear about wildlife and how you can help save our wild isles. Brilliant. Oh, but I've got to sign up. I don't have to sign up, but already I'm thinking you just want my details, don't you? Anyway, I'm going to scroll past that. Take action today. At home, at work, at school. I'm going to click on at home. Takes me through to another load of text. And actually it suggests that at first I find out about my impact on the planet. So I'm going to go being taken through to a footprint calculator. And I'm now being asked questions about what I'm going to eat in my diet. I just wanted to know how to help to save British wildlife. And I'm already deep in having read loads of text. I'm interested, but just imagine lots of people who need to join in with this who aren't interested. They will have given up ages ago. I was reading about wild isles in the Radio Times. Here's a quote that was from someone who shall be nameless in the Radio Times. Purely practically, there's not a lot you can do to stop the Amazon rainforest being cut down, but there's an awful lot you can do to stop your local woodland being cut down. I bet if you went out on the street and asked people how to stop their local woodland being cut down, they wouldn't have a clue. It's also not true to say there's nothing you can do to stop animals and rainforests being cut down. So I'm going to scribble this out. I think it's a silly quote because, you know, with global trade, so many things that we buy and we use come from around the world. So we have influences. All of us as individuals obviously have influence right the way around the world. So of course, there are things we can do to stop Amazon rainforests being cut down, as well as protecting our local woodlands. I'm going to introduce you to some of my favorite books as we go through this as well. This is one I loved reading years ago. Fred Pearce, Confessions of an Eco-Sinner, where he basically looked around his house and in his kitchen cupboards and traced back all of the bits and pieces that he could and where it came from. And not only food products, but the gold in his wedding ring, for example. So this is a brilliant book that looks at people's connections around the world and the kinds of things that we do and the kinds of things that we buy and the impact it has on the planet. But most people won't have read Confessions of an Eco-Sinner, but I like it. Anyway, here we go. Okay, so Citizens Assembly on the People's Plan for Nature. This has been launched recently as well. Excellent. This is something written by Sarah Hudson in the Guardian recently. This is just a couple of days ago. Being part of the People's Plan for Nature, it was illuminating to see how people could reach consensus. This was a great uplifting experience that she went through with 100 other people. And look at this. By the final weekend, Assembly members agreed that UK meat, dairy and fish consumption needed to be reduced by at least a quarter by 2030. Brilliant. Astonishing change of view, she says, from where they started from over these days of discussion. But look at this last bit. When we had dinner in the hotel, most of the people sitting near me chose meat dishes once again, even though they were made from animals reared in the conventional farming systems they had expressed such disquiet about. So people had gone through several days of thinking about what the things we need to do to protect wildlife, to protect the planet, and yet had their behaviour changed at the end of those few days? No. Now, again, I could probably do entire lectures on this, but I won't. But just bear that thought in mind, that even when people get deep in discussions about what we need to do, it's very difficult for people to then go, all right, now I need to start doing things differently. I'm going to blow a few other things out of the water as well now. Okay, here are the few things that I keep hearing and make me increasingly cross, actually, as time goes by. So bear with me, some of these might make you cross as well, and then maybe it'll make you cross that I'm crossing these out, but here we go. I've heard lots of scientists who get into conservation saying this a lot. You know, they want to go out and study this particular type of monkey or flatworm or whatever it is. You know, I need to study everything about this species so that we know how to conserve it. I know how to conserve it. Leave it alone. Then you've got plenty of time into the future to study everything about its mating habits and how long it lives and absolutely everything about it. We need to leave large chunks of this planet alone as functioning ecosystems. We don't need to know every single thing about every single piece of wildlife to know how to save it. Of course, it's very important for some species. If you've got migratory birds, of course, you need to actually find out where they're migrating from and to. There's no point in doing protection in one place if they're going to be wiped out somewhere else. So I'm not saying that people shouldn't study the wildlife, but this saying that we need to study everything in detail about wildlife in order to save it, I think is not true. I have interviewed many people over my years as being head of learning and then head of public engagement at Bristol Zoological Society, and I heard this so many times. I want to share my passion so make everyone else as passionate about wildlife as I am. But actually, just take a step back from that as well. People love history, motor racing, food, watching Netflix, watching footy, okay? What people forget is that it's their passion, but it's not everybody else's passion. And however passionate you are about something, you are not going to change everyone else into having the same passions as you. It's lovely. And again, I'm not saying don't do this. Obviously, people who are passionate about wildlife should share that passion. But again, I think if we think that that is going to be a way for saving wildlife in the way that we need to get on with it, it's not going to work. Here's my other favorite one. This quote is fortunately now not seen so frequently, but when I first started at Bristol Zoo many years ago, this was my justification for being an education officer. People conserve what they love what they understand, and understand what they're taught. Most psychology, and I will take you through some of it today, would say that this is utter rubbish. It's the wrong way around. So I'm going to scribble that one out as well. You don't have to get people to love something in order to understand it and to understand something in order to love it, in order to conserve it. And in fact, that's probably, humans just don't work like that. So there we go. There's a bunch of things which I hear frequently and hear people saying that this is going to work, and actually pretty much all of it doesn't. This is a conceptual mountain, okay? So we're going to get to a little bit about psychology and how people think now. And again, this is just a very quick snapshot, so bear with me on this. Let's imagine that two people have started with no opinion on something. They haven't even thought about it. And there they are at the top of this conceptual mountain. At some point, they're going to make a decision to go one way or the other, take one position or another position on any kind of issue. Once they've done that, then they will justify how it's the right thing to have done. And this could be anything. It could be a choice of car. It could be what you're going to eat. It could be all sorts of things, a political position that you've taken. And once you've taken that position, then you will justify it to yourself and to others. That's what people do. We do what we do, and then we post-justify it both to ourselves and others around us. This is what humans do. It's probably the case that the action comes first, the opinion follows. And then, of course, you meet other people who happen to have chosen also your side of this conceptual mountain. And of course, the people who have gone down one side are saying, oh, I'm glad I came down this side because it gets the sun in the morning and it's beautiful. And the people going the other side are saying, of course, I came down the right side of the mountain because I get the beautiful sun in the evening. Whatever it is that justifies the position they've taken, whether it's a physical position or an intellectual position, they will justify to themselves why it's been the right decision. And the more you go down the mountain and the more you meet other people that have said, and you meet and talk to people that have similar views and have taken similar steps, confirmation bias kicks in, and you end up with people taking very opposing positions on things where you could have started off with them having no position at all. And excuse me, of course, once you've gone down one side of that conceptual mountain, it's very tricky to persuade people to go back up the top and down the other side. So I'm mixing up here. You've got to go with the idea. This is a metaphor. Okay, I'm not talking about real mountains here, but this is about people taking positions on something and then basically confirming to themselves that they made the right decision. We do this all the time. So it's this way around. It's action leads to opinion far more than the other way around. We like to think we're rational and we're not. Okay, so what is the right way? I'm blowing things out of the water here too much. People talk a lot about reconnecting people with nature. You know, we've got, what is it, 52, 53% of the world's population living in cities now and disconnected from nature. And there's a thought that actually you've got to get people back connected to nature in order for them to feel part of it, and then in order to preserve it. I mean, this picture here looks lovely, but that's a canalized, very managed river. That's probably a monoculture of grass. There's man-made structures in it. I bet quite a lot of the species of trees there are probably not originally native to the UK. So yes, I'm not saying that reconnecting people with nature is a bad thing. It's a brilliant thing and it's excellent for people. Does it actually help wildlife? Is connection with nature as beneficial for the wildlife and the conservation of wildlife as it is for people? I would suggest not. And again, I'll expand that a little bit as we go through. And of course, some people love that connection with nature. You know, people say, oh, get out, jump in puddles in your wellies, go and climb trees, etc. If you like that kind of thing, that's brilliant. But if you are the kind of person who actually likes your shiny shoes and doesn't want to go out because nature's horrible, because it's cold and you get your shoes muddy and you slip over and you don't know what you're seeing. So there's a lot of people on this planet who actually don't want to go out and get into nature. So again, we've got to be a little bit careful of going, just because nature is good for people and because some people like going out into it, and you know, there are studies to show that people with a greater connection to nature have a greater propensity to make environmental decisions. But which way round is that? Is that just a correlation? You know, is it just more likely that people who have got an interest in nature are going to go out in it? It doesn't necessarily mean if you do it the other way round and get people out into nature, they're necessarily going to start making environmental decisions. So yes, connecting people with nature is a great thing. Is it going to help us with biodiversity conservation? I don't think so, particularly when we need all of the people, including one with shiny shoes, to get involved as well. All right, so what about being informed consumers? I've heard this lot as well. This is about science literacy. This is about people understanding their impact on the planet and therefore making informed decisions. Okay, let's try this out on you. Now, I'd love to have a live audience here, but I'm not going to do this, but maybe just pretend that you're a live audience. I'm going to make you make a decision, okay? You want to buy a new towel and forget design or softness or anything like that at the moment. I'm going to force you to decide whether you're going to buy one made out of recycled plastic bottles or organic cotton. Now, I'm not going to do a poll here because we'd start to take too much time, but just imagine if we did. And I bet, because I've done this a lot with my students and also bigger audiences, I bet about half and half of you will go for each. Some will argue for the recycled plastic bottles because it's using the plastic that's already there and putting it to good use. Others will actually argue for organic cotton. But it's complex because then when you put your recycled plastic bottle towel in the washing machine, the microfibers go out and then that's going to damage, I mean, they're all over the place now, it's going to damage ecosystems. But then cotton takes huge areas to grow it. And it's a thirsty crop as well. So actually, okay, which is the right decision? I mean, if you look at organizations selling these, okay, here we've got Dock and Bay. There's a little bit here. We're passionate about doing our bit for the world we live in and reducing our environmental footprint. So they've absolutely gone from everything they sell to do with 100% recycled materials. They're going for 100% recycled plastic bottles, doing their bit to save the planet. Go to another website, and here we've got an argument that actually what they're saying here, it's made from organic cotton, so you can say goodbye to synthetics on your next trip to the beach with no plastic nasties. So which is the right decision? Both of these are making environmental decisions, and there's no doubt that people want, more and more people want to buy the thing which is better for nature, is better for wildlife. But now you've got two competing sites here telling you to buy their product because it's better for nature. Which is better? Blimey, if we're going to be informed consumers, I don't know how to go through this. So actually, if you're going to buy a towel or clothes or a shirt or coat or whatever, or a fleece, is it best to buy it out of recycled plastic bottles or cotton or wool? Okay, you're going to get into all sorts of complexity here. There's a lovely article in New Scientist, this was nearly 5 years ago now. There was an estimate that actually, or a suggestion that with the move to synthetics, actually more land is going out of being farmed and actually being just kind of rewilded because it's being left alone. So there was a big suggestion there that actually moving to synthetics is actually better for the environment. There's a thing called the Higgs Sustainability Index for materials. And if you look at this example on the right here, so alpaca wool is like really bad, cow leather not brilliant. But look at the one here, which has actually got the best score for textiles, is kangaroo leather. So this is about sustainable take of wild animals. So this is not about farming. This is not about taking huge areas to grow a crop for making things out of. This is sustainable take for wild animals. So I went off on a tangent a little while ago with my students and thought, well, actually, do you know what? Therefore, perhaps what we should all be doing in the UK, which would help reduce grey squirrel numbers, which would help red squirrel numbers, etc. We should all be wearing squirrel skin clothes, because that's the most environmentally, I don't know, blimey. But if this is 2018, if you look at an updated Higgs Material Sustainability Index, actually it's all slightly different. Now, silk is the worst. Okay, so this I threw in the idea informed consumers, but look how complicated it gets. By the way, if I did force you to choose that towel from organic cotton or polyester, the recycled bottles, you can see that actually they've both got quite a small footprint. They're down there towards the bottom of this graph, so that's a good thing. But this, of course, is only up to the point where they're sold. This is from manufacture to selling. Of course, then what happens later might make a big difference. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is it's complex. So we're expecting everyone to make informed decisions about everything that they buy. Again, this isn't going to work. And just gut reactions to things as well, and decision making. A lot of people would look at this, an oil palm plantation, and immediately have negative thoughts. And they would look at this. Well, it depends. It depends if you know what it is. I mean, this is terraformed a landscape to plant a monoculture. So again, you might look at this and go, well, that's just as bad as oil palm plantations. This is a Prosecco vineyard. So, and some champagne vineyards are actually World Heritage sites. So monocultures are looked at very differently depending on the kinds of monoculture it is. I mean, a lot of people think, beautiful British countryside. This is an industrial landscape. Anything you use is often grown in monocultures. That's almonds on the right, that's coconut in the middle. Anything you choose. But campaigns can colour your views around something. So palm oil has a lot of bad press. Whereas, a lot of people use almond milk or something, and there's huge monocultures of almond crops, and soy and all sorts of things. Oh, blimey, this is difficult, isn't it? Informed consumers, I don't think this is going to get us there either. And anyway, what is this future we're aiming for? If you ask lots of people, what does a future sustainable planet look like? I mean, certainly in the 1970s and 80s, everything futuristic was shiny. We were all going to be wearing tinfoil clothes, and our food would all be pills. And ask what people think they're aiming for in the future. How do we know when we've got a sustainable future? Is it going to look like this? Is it going to look like this? This is a picture on an estate where there's an amazing rewilding program going on. Is it going to look like this? Are we going to go for actually reintroducing predators into the UK? Here's a lynx kitten chasing a rabbit. So informed consumers is not going to work, I think, because it's too complicated. And probably everyone's got a slightly different view of what we're aiming for as well. So this wildlife conservation stuff, this is hard. And yet lots and lots of conservation organizations say, don't worry, we'll sort it for you. Come and join us. Give us your money. Do the kinds of things we ask you to do. Be like us. Really? Do we all, even us members of conservation organizations, do all of the right things all of the time? I certainly don't. So I'm going to scribble that one out as well. Wildlife conservation. Hard. I'm not surprised that we've got so many conservation organizations and yet we seem to be failing, because it's not easy stuff. So, okay, let's begin to turn it around and let's go in the direction now of seeing if we can make this better. Perhaps we need to think about this the other way around, not come and join us and be like us conservationists, whatever they are, but be you. Be brilliant at being you, being a plasterer, a chef, a hairdresser, a lawyer, a politician. Be you, be great at what you love doing, and let's find a way of doing everything that you do, which we all need anyway. We all need plumbers and electricians and politicians, and whether we like it or not, we've got to find a way of doing everything sustainably. So rather than conservation organizations saying, come and be a conservationist, I think we need to flip this on its head and begin to think about, let's take sustainability and conservation thinking out to where people are in their normal everyday lives. We've got to take everything and make it sustainable. And it's got to be at scale. Now, I've picked on Tesco here simply because, having been involved with the Communicate conference well, since it started in 2004, there was an amazing situation where someone from Tesco came, I think this was 2007, and talked about all the things that they were doing to mitigate their climate impact. The way they were changing their distribution networks, the way they were constructing their stores and their freezer cabinets and all sorts of things. And I watched this and I thought, this is amazing. Here's a big company, a massive company, which is part of normal life. Okay, lots and lots, millions and millions of people go and shop at Tesco, and of course plenty of other supermarkets every day. And I thought this was amazing. But then after she'd finished speaking and she'd gone, the audience erupted, and there were lots of deep green people in the audience, and it was like, how dare Tesco talk about things like this and what they're doing? It must all be greenwash. And this automatic assumption that any big multinational must, by definition, being evil. I just thought that's a really interesting reaction there. We need to embrace that. Anything and everything that we do in everyday life, whether it's shopping at Tesco or going out and climbing a tree, has to be sustainable. I mean, Tesco is made up of people too, right? They're all people. There's people right from top to bottom. And this is all about people. We'll come to people a bit more in just a second. And people. Whatever you think of people, they're all people. They've all got reasons of acting in the way that they have, and we can learn from them. When Donald Trump became president, lots of people immediately dismissed the people that voted for him, saying, I don't know why they're doing it, how they're doing it. I looked at that, and with my students, I went, let's watch what's going on here in terms of communication. How is it you can get such a mass movement of people really rooting for something or someone? Don't dismiss this. Look at it, learn from it. Mass movement is where it's at. We've got to do this at scale and use whatever techniques we can learn from whoever, if we're going to do wildlife conservation really well. So going from mountains to islands here, imagine that, I don't know, maybe you're a conservationist, you're sitting on that island, you'd probably choose to sit on that one with the palm trees, and imagine people shopping at Tesco or politicians or something on the other island. And people always think of themselves in separate tribes, but actually dig deep enough, go under the water. We're all humans, we've all got different things that are driving us. There's going to be similarities underneath. Everyone wants to live on a planet that's habitable, right? So this is about looking for similarities, not differences, and understanding people, whatever they're doing. It's about people. Conservation action is not about the wildlife. It's about people. People. And people are driven by habit. This is definitely a swift overview of psychology, but go with it. And then there's lots and lots to read. Habit, social proof, and infrastructure. We like to think that we are rational like Spock, but we're not. Most of human behavior is driven by all sorts of irrational stuff and heuristics and habits. We are much more like Homer than we like to think. We're definitely not Spock. We're much more human race, human people. We're like Homer. So those people, okay, let's just dive into that for a second. This is not to scale, okay? This is just, I just made some scribbles and thinking, what are people are interested in? I've mentioned history and things, football, gaming, watching films, all sorts of things. Of course, lots of people are interested in nature as well. And people are interested in people. But I labour the point here. This is not to scale. This is not based on anything apart from, this is a conceptual diagram of people not all being interested in wildlife, okay? And yet we need all of these people to be involved in making the planet a better place. Okay, I'm going to go to something just very briefly off on a tangent. Those of you who will know me know that I can't resist a tangent. This is a diagram to scale, and I'm putting it in just because it's fascinating, and it's a paper that came out recently that I love. This is the biomass of mammals, okay? Beautiful piece of work, lots of computer modeling behind it as well. But if you look at wild terrestrial mammals, a big chunk of them is things like deer and pigs. That make up a big chunk of terrestrial mammals. And in the sea, it's essentially baleen whales make up most of the biomass of mammals in the sea. But have a look at this. This is wild mammals, okay? If you take all mammals, including humans and livestock, look at this diagram. I just think that's fascinating and puts an amazing thing in context here, that most of the mammal biomass on this planet is either humans or cows. And that one is to scale. Extraordinary. Anyway, let's come back to my not to scale diagram. The reason I put this here is because top left there, you've got people interested in nature, okay? There's a subset of those who are so interested in nature, and they're conservationists, okay? They're interested in wildlife conservation. But I've just said that conservation is all about people. Now, there are plenty of people that are interested in people and their psychology and how they work, but look at the overlap. Remember, this is not to scale, this is just to make a point. If wildlife conservation is about understanding people, but also thinking about the wildlife, that's a very small intersection. It's a very small number of people. We need to expand that overlap. So many people that go into conservation because they are interested in and want to understand the wildlife. My suggestion is we need to be much better at understanding the people. So, other bit of brief psychology here. It's another one of my favorite books, Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. Most of our daily lives are in what he calls system one. It's the effortless autopilot, fast, intuitive thinking. You have to do that to get through life. You don't stop and make decisions about every single thing. Every decision you're going to make, you just don't. So there's all sorts of biases built into that. And for most of the time, it's great. You make good decisions, mostly on intuition, and it works. But every now and again, you have to stop and really think something through. You know, which car are you going to buy? Which thing are you going to shop for today? Which person are you going to marry? I don't know, all sorts of things. And then you go into system two, where maybe you could take all sorts of examples. There are times you go into slow, effortful system two thinking, but most of the time we don't. And in fact, even when you do, that's still open to errors and biases as well. So that's the internal stuff going on in people's heads. Most of it is an autopilot. It really is. And then this is a social context. We're much more like starlings than we like to think we are as well. Here's another good book here, Mark Earl's Herd. Humans are very social, very herd-like creatures. We do what other people do around us. It's very difficult to, some people like to be different and stand out from the crowd, but most people will actually look at social pressures. And then, of course, that's all operating in the actual environment around. So things that, it's the infrastructure, the things that make things available or nudge you in certain directions. So here's another great book to read, Thaler and Sunstein's Nudge. And some people are a little bit concerned about the ethics of this, because this could be about, therefore, manipulating situations in order to make people do what you want them to do. At the beginning of Nudge, they use a phrase which is libertarian paternalism to say, look, this is not about making people do things they don't want to do. This is about enabling people to make the decisions that they would make if they could be bothered and if they could really think it through. So, individual stuff going on, the thinking fast and slow, in a social context and in the structure of the material world. There's a model called ISM, individual, social, material, and some great behavioural models for actually thinking through, therefore, behaviour change campaigns, social action campaigns. It struck me a while ago also that this is related to doing crimes as well. Okay, I like watching crime dramas. There's always means, motive, and opportunity for someone to commit a crime. If you remove any one of those three things, the crime doesn't happen. You can work on motivation as much as you like, but if people don't have the means and the opportunity to do what you want them to do or what they want to do, then again, the behaviour doesn't happen. So the rule of three: individual, social, material, or means, motive, and opportunity. Here's a psychology module that's been in the literature for a very long time, and I want you to just pay attention to this because I'm going to use it again in about 7 minutes time, so we'll come back to this. This is a very simple model of why people do the things that they do, the action. Okay, usually it's preceded by an intention to act, and that intention is driven by, here's the internal, social, and material again. So the attitude at the top, this is the bit about your internal attitude. Is it a good or a bad thing to do? If you think something's a good thing to do, you're more likely to do it than if you think it's a bad thing to do. That's your own internal attitudes towards the behavior. But also, you're going to think about this in a social context and who you rate and who's important to you. So also, even if you think something's a really good thing to do, if you think other people would disapprove, actually that's a bit of a barrier. So you're likely to do things that you think are a good thing to do, and you think that other people would approve of, and that you think are easy to do as well. And this is a really powerful model for thinking through what sorts of things need to be in place to get people to act on the things that they want to act on. Like I said, most people want the place to be nice and habitable to live in. They want a nice habitable planet, don't we all? So if we want some behaviours that people can do, we need to make sure that they think it's good stuff to do, that it's socially acceptable, and make it as easy as possible. That's what this boils down to. The important thing about the theory of planned behaviour is it's based on beliefs. And sometimes people's beliefs about certain behaviours are erroneous. Remember that, we're going to come back to it. Right, there's supposed to be a little bit about zoos in this presentation, so we better talk about zoos. This is just figures for British zoos. More than 35 million visitors per year. I bet it's probably less than that individuals, because I expect some people are zoo nerds and go to several zoos a year. But anyway, we're talking millions of visitors visiting British zoos every year. 1.2 million children in education sessions, research projects, all sorts of things. But I just want to focus on that millions of visitors. I started thinking about what we're going to do with those visitors quite a few years ago. This was 2008. I did a presentation at a zoo conference, which was sort of the precursor to what I'm doing right now. Basically saying zoos are not about animals, guys. We need to start thinking about our visitors and the people far more. So quite often you hear people talking about the roles of a modern zoo being conservation, entertainment, learning and research, with conservation in the middle. And thinking about research, entertainment and learning feeding into conservation. Now, I very deliberately put the overlaps on here really quite small. Yes, some learning that goes on in zoos is about conservation, maybe leads to conservation, but quite a lot of it doesn't. When I was teaching at the zoo, lots of stuff was about all, the amazing stuff to do with wildlife, where it lives and how big it grows and what eats what, doesn't necessarily lead to conservation outcomes. Good stuff, but I don't think you can claim it's all conservation stuff. Entertainment, well, that's mostly getting people in to have a lovely day at the zoo and using their money. That's getting them there, getting an audience. And research as well. Of course, some research in zoos definitely goes to conservation, but lots of it is about how animals use their enclosures, what they eat, student projects, all sorts of things. Again, good stuff, not saying any of this isn't good stuff, but the overlaps of actually achieving conservation is probably less than zoos would like to necessarily think. So here's a different diagram. I'm thinking about the conservation bit in the middle, but actually 3 ways that zoos really can do conservation. Top left was encapsulated in the first World Zoo Conservation Strategy, which was published back in 1993. I started working in Bristol Zoo. I had a summer job in 1989. So my career at the zoo basically saw 3 different versions of this World Conservation Strategy. So the first one back in 1993 was very much about the zoo's role in conservation, being about breeding species. So you've got golden lion tamarins there, top left, Livingston's fruit bats, and Lord Howe Island stick insects. A sort of arc concept. Now that's extraordinarily important for some wildlife where basically it's got no hope in the wild. Lots of amphibians at the moment and all sorts of things, but actually in a way that's emergency care for the species that have almost gone. Very important. Again, I'm not saying zoos shouldn't be doing that. It's a really important role for zoos, but it isn't conservation done, tick. That's the emergency care while we sort the rest of the things out. So when the updated version of the World Zoo and Aquarium Conservation Strategy was published in 2005, that was also talking about zoos getting involved in outside their walls and their fences and getting involved in field conservation and research. And Bristol Zoological Society has been doing that for a long time as well. And that's really, really important too. But again, if you add up all the places where zoos are working around the world, it's usually in particular villages, particularly protected areas. Crucial stuff, but it doesn't address what people are buying in the shops in Tesco. So the third bit, and this is a very recent version of the World Zoo and Aquarium Conservation Strategy published in 2015, is now beginning to talk about this third part of zoos' role in actually engaging their visitors in social change, taking the pressure off those wild places so we've got plenty of time to go and study the rest of the wildlife and find out the amazing things about it. And even more recently, the World Zoo and Aquarium Conservation Education Strategy, we'll look at its title, Social Change for Conservation. And this was published during lockdown in 2020. And this is all about changing the way that zoo education works into actually thinking about How do we get people to do things differently? How can we encourage and enable our visitors to make the world a better place? Social change for conservation. Think of those millions of visitors. Now, it's very interesting that zoos are already socially embedded. Okay, there's already a habit there. People visit the zoo. Not everybody, of course. Some people don't like zoos at all, but a lot of people do. Millions of people visit the zoo. It's a habit. People go with their families. Let's go and visit the zoo. And a little bit like, I don't know if this is a good idea or not, but one thing about Sir David Attenborough is for most of his broadcasting career, he showed the wonder of nature, but didn't campaign. And such that in recent years, when he started actually being a little bit more forthright and campaigning, people have gone, blimey, actually, if he says it now and he hasn't been campaigning for ages, it must be important. And zoos haven't traditionally been campaigning pressure groups. So this is the thing about, it's a socially normal thing to do. And people generally trust zoos like Sir David, socially normal and mostly trusted. Interestingly, though, as zoos have basically portrayed themselves as this fun day out with the family, we're now getting into this state where actually we're trying to deal with a planetary existential crisis. That's an interesting juxtaposition. How do you square a fun family day out with a planetary existential, I can't even say it, you see. Now, we started playing with this at Bristol Zoo back in 2008. We worked with the Marine Stewardship Council and put some new interpretation in our aquarium. This is our aquarium building there. Some new screens in, and we started talking about overfishing in the seas. We also made sure that our catering became MSC certified, so when people bought their fish and chips for lunch, they saw the logo there as well. And we also became, I think, the first zoo in the world to get our animal feed also MSC certified as well. So we went through the whole caboodle. And then you can talk about MSC when you're feeding the seals, when you're feeding the penguins, etc. And we did some studies and research around there, which I don't have time to go into now, but we did this for 3 or 4 years. But the other thing we did, which was interesting at the time, is slightly thinking ahead, was we put a freezer cabinet of fish fingers on the exit to the aquarium. That is very out of place in an aquarium, hence the title of this slide. So people were walking out of the aquarium in the zoo and going, why is that's just odd? Why is there a freezer cabinet of fish fingers there? But of course, when people are actually out buying their fish fingers, they're not thinking about their day out at the zoo. They're thinking about what they're going to eat for dinner tonight. But if you've put the context of the decision-making situation in front of them when they're in the zoo, then maybe next time they are in front of a freezer cabinet, it will trigger them to think, oh, that little blue logo. So putting a cue in the zoo situation, which is going to potentially cue them up when they're actually out doing their shopping, is probably much more useful than just having normal signage in the zoo or a normal talk in the zoo, which they're not going to remember when they're out shopping. They're just not. Okay, so we were starting to play with this in 2008, but we didn't really know what we were doing, to be honest. And then I went to a conference in 2010 and met a couple of really influential people. Rachel Lowry was had to be an education manager at Werribee Open Range Zoo, which is part of Zoos Victoria in the state of Victoria in Australia. And they'd been doing lots of work with schools on endangered possums. And then they phoned up 60 schools they'd been working with to find out what they'd been doing to help these endangered possums. And they'd been doing extensive work with these schools. And what they found was none of them had done anything. Their research showed that people knew more about possums. They were more favourably disposed to possums. Their attitudes towards possums were, I mean, of course they're going to be with a little cute thing like that. But the important thing is that the schools hadn't done anything. Now, at the same time, someone else that I met was Liam Smith, who was at Monash University. He also came to this 2010 conference. Now, he's a psychologist. And this was the brilliant spark where you've got a situation where you've got someone working in education in zoos. She isn't anymore. She's actually forgotten her exact title, but fairly high up. She's head of conservation in WWF Australia now. And Liam runs a group called Behaviour Works, all about encouraging pro-environmental and other and health behaviours and all sorts of things, but it's using the psychology to encourage beneficial behaviours. Anyway, going back to this point, they were both interested in this zoo proposition. So they said, okay, well, if we're doing this kind of school stuff and there are talks going on in the zoo, but nobody's doing anything different, what's going wrong? So they really sat down and thought about it and said, okay, what we need to be is very specific. Maybe we're not being specific enough. We need to think exactly what's going wrong. What's the issue that we need to address? Then exactly who are we talking to? Who's our audience? And what do we want them to do? Be really specific about this. And then hopefully, if you get the right audience doing the right actions, the outcome is then basically linked back to the issue and actually addressing the issue, the threatening process, whatever it is. So I'm going to give you an example of this. It's one of my favorite examples, and it's one of their first campaigns. It's not the first, but it's one of the first. So here's the issue. Here's the situation. 95% of Australians buy non-recycled toilet paper. That's nearly 7 million trees flushed down the toilet in Australia every year. That's ridiculous. And here's their objective. Okay, now their audience is people visiting the zoo, in this case, Healesville Sanctuary, which is basically all Australian wildlife. And look at their objective, very clear, to shift at least 10,000 households towards recycled toilet paper in 1 year, in the first year of running the campaign. So very specific on the issue, very specific on who they want to do this, and setting a smart target. Let's go back to the theory of planned behavior. I said I was going to talk about it, and here it is again. So what you do before you run this campaign is you run a series of questions past your visitors about using recycled toilet paper. You ask them questions like, what are the good things that will happen if you use recycled toilet paper? What are the negatives of using recycled toilet paper? That's the first bit, the attitude. Who would approve or who would disapprove if you used recycled toilet paper? What makes it easy? What makes it hard? 6 questions. And the important thing is it leads you to some really important things to help you with your campaign. They called the campaign White for Wildlife. This was aimed mostly at 12-year-old boys with lots of bottom humour. What they found from those clever research questions was everyone believed strongly that if they used recycled toilet paper, it would be better for wildlife and the environment. Everybody knew that, everybody believed that. So doing a campaign on that is a complete waste of time and money. So what are the differences in beliefs between people who did and didn't buy recycled toilet paper? Oh, and by the way, when I say recycled toilet paper, one of the beliefs they found was that some people actually thought it was made out of toilet paper that had been used before. And if you believe that, of course, you're not going to buy recycled toilet paper. That's weird and disgusting. I mean, if you stop and think about it, go to system 2, of course that can't be true. But most people aren't in system 2, they're going on autopilot. And if they really believe in the back of their minds without thinking about it, that it's made out of toilet paper that someone's used before, of course they're not going to buy it. So anyway, what did they find the differences were? It was all about, it's uncomfortable, it's going to be rough on my bottom, it's more expensive, and it's too thin and tears easily. People are driven not by wildlife concerns, but by softness, price, and strength. So that's what you campaign on. You address people's beliefs about softness, price, and strength to do with recycled toilet paper. Now, there's all sorts of things. Again, I haven't got time to go into it now, but a really well-run campaign. I'll give you a key of what swung it at the moment. And what they found was that here, rather than the zero schools action with the possums, they got 27% of non-compliers, i.e. the people who hadn't been using recycled toilet paper, to switch. That's about 36,000 people in their 1 year. That's your 10,000 households done. They're celebrating it here. And look at that guy in the green costume. That's Crapman. From their research to follow up, Crapman was the most effective influence in this campaign. He was their costume superhero, okay? He was congratulating people when they came out of the toilets about using recycled toilet paper, which of course people had just used, maybe without realizing it. He ran silly games, getting them to build the tallest pyramid they could out of toilet rolls, getting them therefore to feel it. Lots of other activities. So people actually, their beliefs about softness and strength are being are absolutely directly addressed by running activities, silly activities, stupid activities, fun activities. That's why people switched, because their beliefs were altered in a fun way. So if you look at their website now, they're up to 275,000 people who have pledged to commit to switching to recycled toilet paper. I can guarantee if they went on the old model of informed consumers, tell people to love it, all that kind of stuff, zero. But understand what's really driving their behavior, softness, price, and strength, address that in a fun way, off you go. Then you get the change. 275,000 people. Another of their most recent campaigns is this. They found out that in their research on flesh-footed shearwaters on Phillip Island, amongst other birds, huge amounts of plastic is in the chicks' guts before they're even fledging. Now they worked out lots of it's from plastic bottles and plastic bags, and lots of that was being addressed by campaigns already, but no one was doing anything about balloon releases. Here is a socially normal behavior, releasing large amounts of rubber and plastic and string into the atmosphere to calm down who knows where, but it's a totally socially normal behavior. And when I spoke to Rachel before they ran this campaign, she said, I don't know how we're going to do this and address this without being the fun police. And look at how we're the fun police in the UK. This is a screen grab from a recent news report, okay? Here's a bunch of kids releasing balloons. They're having a celebration. Maybe they're going to a new school or something, okay? This is and people do it at funerals, they do it at parties. But look, mass releases of balloons like this one have been condemned for harming wildlife. And look at what went on to say in this news report. People who hold balloon releases in tribute to dead loved ones should face harsher punishments, Green campaigners say. Blimey. That's a bit of a downer. But look at what Zoos Victoria did. You can be part of the solution. Now, okay, it's a hard-hitting thing up front. When balloons fly, seabirds die, but they move immediately on to, you can be part of the solution. Here's how. Promise to blow bubbles at your next outdoor celebration. They had plenty of spaces in and around the zoo. This is a Melbourne Zoo. For pledging. People could pledge to blow bubbles at their next outdoor celebration. They had silly games. They had Professor Bublé riding around on a bicycle, blowing big bubbles. They blew bubbles into their animal enclosures. So they're basically playing with the solution, making it socially normal. So no finger pointing, no guilt tripping. This is all about a solution and making it fun and aspirational. A record-breaking attempt at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. Aspirational. So many audience get engaged. Of course, behind the scenes, they were also talking to the big businesses that used to hand out helium balloons at opening a new DIY store. They spoke to funeral parlours and did a bit of choice editing, taking off balloon releases off the list of things that you could choose when you're planning a funeral or something like that, and adding the alternative, the bubble blowing. And they've also, on their website, they have an environmentally friendly bubble mixture as well, if you're wondering. And then, of course, you can get schools and other people involved in doing beach cleans. Now, beach cleans doesn't solve the problem, but it monitors the problem. And what they found now already is in the space of measuring between 2018-19 and the previous years, 57% less bits of those balloon bits being found on the beaches. This is amazing. And the other thing is, this has been such a popular and positive campaign. And I won't play you this video, but if you go to this, you can go to their website and watch this video. It's a short video, which basically says, thank you very much, everybody, because as from July 2021, it is now illegal to release any number of balloons in the state of Victoria. And many of other states in Australia are doing the same thing. So far from being the fun police, they've thought about an aspirational behaviour, a socially normal behaviour, a fun behaviour, and replaced the quotes bad behavior with a good one. They've understood what's driving human behavior. Okay, I was at Co-op the other day buying some snacks for our students who were just about to do assess presentations, and over their tannoy, over their radio system, I heard about a palm oil app, and they went on to talk about the fact that you can now scan all their products in the Co-op, because own brand product, Co-op products all have sustainable palm oil, some form of sustainable palm oil, if they've got palm oil at all in them, but they support sustainable palm oil. And they've been working with Chester Zoo. So this is also linking back. This is what zoos are beginning to do in this country, but I have to say that almost no other zoos at the moment are doing it. I love the stuff that Zoos Victoria have been doing, and plenty of other Australian zoos. Almost anywhere else, this has not been picked up, except perhaps by Chester Zoo and one or two others. We were doing some work in Bristol as well, making quite a bit of headway. So zoos are actually getting out such that you will hear about Chester Zoo's work and palm oil and sustainable palm oil when you're out shopping at Co-op. So we're coming towards the end of my bit now, towards the end, not quite there yet. So the potential power of good zoos. Going back to that, millions of people visiting, millions of people, socially normal, fun, aspirational, trusted, connected, because these are also into retail, catering, finance, building, art, all sorts of things. So actually not just with visitors, but all of the people that supply the zoo with all sorts of things. Massive influence that zoos could have. Lots of zoos working together. But here's my caveat. Only if they take the social science seriously. I hear too many people working in zoos and outside zoos as well saying, yes, people come have a nice day out and they have a lovely time and then they'll go on and they do things differently. It won't. They won't. This has got to be about understanding how humans really behave, what their barriers and their motivations are, taking the social science as well as the biological science seriously. And then zoos have this massive power to really bring about some big change. But of course, so does everybody else as well. It's taking the same ideas. And we have to do this at scale. So something like the MSc, which I mentioned before, we have to get to a situation where anyone and everyone, when they go to their fish and chip shop, is buying sustainable fish. And it doesn't have to, it can't be just local artisanal fisheries here and around the world. There's got to be the big industrial fisheries as well, because we're talking here about changing the world, not just a few nice bits and pieces here and there. And so here to finish up with, and to just move back away from zoos for a second, is another high impact campaign that you might have seen recently. This is really game changing as well. Someone had a brilliant idea that because of the UK's rather embarrassing colonial past, we kind of have jurisdiction over a lot of little rocks distributed around the planet. And therefore, the UK government has within their power to declare the 200-mile economic exclusion zones around all of these islands as marine protected areas. And this is a brilliant idea, but it wasn't quite getting there. And then when Blue Planet 2 was just about to be broadcast, Tim Scoons, who used to be executive producer of Springwatch, amongst many other things, basically got brought on board and kind of galvanized a bunch of communications to get together and just brought a whole lot of stuff together. I mean, this is a big team effort, but just getting the communication right, but understanding all the different people. The people on the islands wanted to protect their waters, so they've got sustainable fishing in them as well. And they were remembering, this is a guy who remembered when he fished when he was young, the massive fish and the huge numbers of fish that were in the waters around the island that he lived on. So essentially, a very simple website was set up to drive people to it, to basically encourage their politicians to sign a charter to declare these overseas territories as marine protected areas. Back the Blue Belt, it was called. This is getting, the usual suspects, people like Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall, but also other people. Stephen Fry here, and this is his take on it as well. All sorts of people who other people will recognise, people that they would rate. All saying, back the Blue Belt, basically ask your politicians to do this. It's within their power. Getting them to do it as well. This became a massive media storm. And hundreds of politicians signed up to this and went, yeah, we can do this. Because the public want it. The people on the islands want it. The politicians want it. And we can do it. So we can look good while we do it as well. So this is when Michael Gove was Environment Minister. So this brought about this actually happening. So now, if you look on the government website, back the Blue Belt campaign, look at this. More than 4.3 million square kilometres of the marine environment now designated as marine protected zones. This is extraordinary. There is so much good stuff going on at the moment. We need to start celebrating our successes. People need to be part of this. This needs to be aspirational. So we can do this. I mentioned zoos a little bit here, but this is, everybody else can. Filmmakers, people who run shops, people who are bankers, anyone and everyone. Actually, this is doable, but it's about understanding people. If we understand the people leading normal everyday lives and are solution focused, think about what we want to achieve and achieve it with people, collaborate with all of the amazing skills that people have, get away from that rational Spock-like thinking and thinking, no, people don't work like that. Understand people, what the real barriers and the real motivations are, and work with that to be razor sharp and razor focused, and not work on that principle of getting people to join us conservationists. No, do what they do, but in a better way for all of us. We are going to need miners, we are going to need engineers, designers, politicians, bankers. They all need to do the things we need to do, and we need them all, but they just need to do what they do in a way which makes the planet a better place rather than destroying it. Everyone wants to do that. We just need to enable them how. And we need to celebrate success. We need to party more often with the things that we've achieved, because this needs to be aspirational, and we can do this. And we need to do it because this, going right back to the beginning, is all we have. Thank you. That's where I'm going to stop sharing and stop talking.
Thank you, Simon. So I can, oh, here we go. Put the video back on. I can see already that we've had a lot of comments in the chat. Obviously, there's a lot of big topics there, and many emotive topics as well. Lots of things to talk about, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that want to talk about things in the audience as well. I'd like to invite anyone to put their hands up if they have questions, and we can get to you one by one. I can see from the chat there were a couple of messages. There was one that was specifically phrased as a question, so I'll start by reading that one out from Sarah Thomas. She says, question for Simon, can you talk more about your thoughts on how different worldviews or Indigenous thought should be woven into modern approaches to zoos and conservation?
Sarah's probably better to talk about that one than I am, actually. I'm very conscious as well that what I'm taking, I've shared my own views, and I'm doing this from a very white middle class British perspective. I can't help who I am and what I am, but the same will apply. It's all, it needs to be understood. This is all about people, and we have to understand whichever stakeholders are important. So any culture, any Indigenous group, anyone who's got any power over anything needs to be involved in this decision making, but in this totally engaged, totally involved, totally enabled way, positive way, not finger pointing, not finger wagging, not banning people from doing stuff that, you know, that's terrible, but a collaborative effort where everyone needs to be heading in the same direction, which is easy to say and very hard to do, but it's got to involve everybody.
Absolutely. And I wanted to just mention, since it's just past 7 o'clock, that if anyone is worried about missing out on the Q&A, we will continue the recording, and that will be uploaded onto the website so you can watch it afterwards. I'm aware that also there's been other comments and discussions in the chat box, but none that I've seen as direct questions. So I'd like to invite anyone who has posted there that wants to ask Simon anything in person, so that I don't sort of reread through the whole chat going on. So I can see Ian Redmond's hand up.
Thank you, Sophie. Hi, Simon.
Hi, Ian.
That was a fantastic exploration of the issue, and I think you're quite right. Wildlife management is more to do with people management than it is to do with things you do to the animals. But you won't have had time to see a lot of the chat in the box, but there's been a lot of concern that the potential benefits that you've outlined that zoos can bring by shaping people's understanding of a problem and encouraging them to act to change some of those problems. It's not necessary to keep, especially large intelligent social mammals and birds, in captivity to achieve that. I would say that perhaps the most useful thing that zoos do is to employ people like you and give you a living so that you can think about conservation. But the whole visitor experience, I think many would see your Venn diagram of a nice day out with the kids in the middle as a very large circle, and then very small research and conservation circles around the outside. So I think it's a bit disingenuous to have conservation at the core. It might be at the core of what you think you're doing in zoos and what other conservationists who are employed by zoos think they're doing. And for those doing field conservation, absolutely they are. The zoos are supporting field conservation. But there are many conservationists who are employed by organizations that don't keep animals in captivity that are equally better. So do you really see in our new sort of climate conscious world, where we're all trying to count our carbon costs, that even the energy expenditure of keeping Arctic animals in temperate zones and tropical animals in temperate zones, so that you're burning energy to maintain their habitat. How can you justify that when everyone's looking at their carbon budget and thinking we have to reduce that? Let's put on an LED screen so we can watch things like Blue Planet 2, get that impact, perhaps in a venue that is a nice day out for the kids, but without extracting animals from the natural habitat and keeping them in yards in the UK. I'll just throw that out there.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I mean, the reason I put the conservation in the middle is because that, for me, needs to be the focus. And what I should make clear as well, I mean, I worked for Bristol Zoological Society for 32 years. I actually don't work for them now, because Bristol Zoo is closed, and they're focusing on just one site, the Wild Place project. So I actually took voluntary redundancy at the end of last year. So I'm kind of, yes, I've got 32 years of zoo-ness in my head, of course. But the reason I put the conservation in the middle of that is because I think that has to be the focus. If zoos exist at all, that has to be the focus. And one of the brave decisions, actually, which Bristol Zoological Society has taken, is to have said that actually into the future they will have most of their species, you know, they're aiming for 80% and then 90% of species in need of some kind of conservation action. But my thesis is, and I hoped that I tried to do it in the slide where I went, but only if. I agree with pretty much most of what you said there. If animals are there purely for entertainment, that doesn't work for me. I mean, you need a place where people want to come and visit, obviously, but I think zoos have a place on this planet if they can maximize their potential in whatever way it is in achieving conservation as much as they possibly can. And it's an avenue for engaging people. I mean, so yeah, I haven't looked at the chat at all because I've just been looking at my screen and my slides. So I'm going to be fascinated to actually look back at the chat afterwards. My frustration with zoos is that they haven't embraced this as much as they should. And my feeling is that if they don't, then probably another 10 or 20 years time, they will, you know, everyone else will have moved. Everyone else will be doing so much more conservation than zoos are in every form, that zoos will make themselves, you know, anachronistic and redundant. I know people think, some people think they are already, but for me, they need to step up in all of their ways that they can achieve conservation in order to earn their place in the future, I think. And any zoo that doesn't do that, I don't think does have a place in the future. They've got to use every lever they can, because they do exist, to play their part in making this planet better and habitable. And of course, there's all sorts of ethical considerations along the way. But I think they need to move far more concertedly and swiftly to doing all the things they need to do, and achieve as much conservation as they can, but particularly through engagement with people. But thank you for that, Ian.
Yeah,
brilliant.
Absolutely. I think Ian phrased some of the issues that were brought up in the chat quite well there. Obviously, I'd like to welcome any other questions as well, from anyone that was also commenting on those issues. And I was just going to briefly mention that we will also share, if anyone has shared their kind of links and things in the chat, we'll make those available under the webinar as well, so that people can access those. Does anyone else have a question? I can see Michael Clark.
Oh, you want me to speak now, yeah?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, because I wasn't really sure how it worked. First of all, hello to Simon. Good to see
Hi.
you again.
Hi.
We were on the Comoros Islands together. With
Blimey, yes.
Livingston's fruit bat.
Yes.
Where we went to the Comoros in order to capture 5 female Livingston's fruit bat for
Absolutely.
the feeding program, which really took off and is very necessary. But I don't particularly want to go into debates about whether the zoos are good, bad, or indifferent. I've recently written a book about our experiences, partly, and it's called the Fragmented World of the Mongoose Lemur. And one of the things that I've lit on is, not lit on, but it's the core of the book, is about fragmentation in the wild. And the more that you look at it in the field, the more the wild looks like a zoo, because there are so many invasive measures needed across all these range countries that include everything that zoos, have been doing traditionally. It's another question whether they've done them well. They've often done them so badly, it's unbelievable. And sometimes they've done things so well, it's incredible the amount of resources they've put into it. The golden lion tamarin, for one, reintroduced to the wild. I wonder how many people realize that the Smithsonian went out there quite recently to inoculate all the golden lion tamarins against yellow fever, because they found it in the population and it would have wiped them out. You can imagine the cost involved in that. And this is because of the relationship between the Washington Zoo and the Smithsonian. But do you recognize what I'm saying about the zoo in the wild? I'm not suggesting that these things are relatable in the sense of transferable skills, but everything that you've talked about this evening squares with me. I've also said it myself many, many times down the years, and I've summarized it in the book. And the zoo in the wild is one of these. It's not really a concept, it's a fact. I can give you another example very recently of something that makes these complexities that you've been talking about even more complex. In Ranamafan, a group called Valbio are protecting forests and reintroducing lemurs into areas where they once were. They reintroduced the greater bamboo lemur group of 5 into the forest very recently. A week later, one of them started following a group of golden bamboo lemurs. The mind-boggling, potential of that is ridiculous. You do something good and you make something worse, potentially, by doing that. So, and another adjunct to this, and one thing that I don't think you touched on, was the intrinsic worth of animals, teaching people that and getting them to accept that. And something that I think is often kind of taken for granted, the cost to the benefit. We remove things from the earth, we extract resources. That has a cost to us in the process of extraction, but it's got a cost to nature. So the benefit to us, is it balanced, by the cost to nature? Are we factoring that in as a cost? Because a cost to nature is a cost to us.
Yes. I mean, there's so much complexity here. I mean, what I hope I've done today as well is, what I didn't want to do is set out just to kind of go, I'm going to justify zoos, because I'm not, and I'm hoping what I've done is also what I've tried to do is put these concepts out for everyone else to think about as well, because even if zoos didn't exist, the same approach needs to be. I used zoo examples just because I know them very well, and particularly the Crapman one is I love it, but that doesn't have to be in a zoo. Actually, that can be run anywhere else. The concept about understanding people and encouraging and enabling people to do things in a better way needs to be done everywhere. People who are making films, people who are setting out, I don't know, whatever they're doing. If we want people to do things in a different way, we need to think about people and what they're doing. That's what I was trying to do today. And obviously I've used zoo examples, but I was slightly at the beginning kind of going, so RSPB, National Trust, WWF, what I didn't want to do is to go, they're doing it all wrong. My thesis was to kind of go, I think we're all a little bit running around in, lots of conservation movement, running around in small circles going, we all need to do something without being targeted. And it doesn't matter whether it's a zoo or anywhere else, any other conservation organization, we need all of us to get much better at that targeting. Exactly what we want people to do. Who can do it? Which skills do we need? Bring them together, move on, sort things, celebrate it, move on to the next thing.
With communication at the heart of it.
All about communication. And I think, I mean, if I'm going to go back to my diagram where I just had that tiny little red dot in the overlap, if I'm going to go back to anything, it's, and try and sum it all up, it's people who are interested in wildlife often get into being conservationists and get into wildlife because they're interested in the wildlife. And what I'm saying is, actually, wildlife conservationists need to be much smarter and much more interested in people and what they're doing. And that's our way forward. It's all about people. The wildlife will get on with it if we let it. It's all about people and what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so tricky, isn't it, when conservation movements sort of ask everyone to do their own bit, and there's just so many complex issues around it, and constantly sort of updating information, everyone trying to do their bit. And that's, I think, obviously coming from the communication education group, communication is just absolutely key, and so is education. And I think that's something that zoos, being an existing factor in that field, currently have an interesting part to play in, and should definitely take a close look at how effective they are, and how we're going to do it going into the future. So I can see that Mani Mavula, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, your hand's up.
That's correct. Thank you, Sophie. And yeah, thanks for the speaker. It's been absolutely amazing, and how you articulated on a lot of issues. However, I just wondered whether this talk is really aimed for the global north and only for people that are sort of living in the Western world, because I am a member and I'd have wanted to hear more about, particularly when Simon talked about the passion that we have should be contained, and let's do best with the passion we have, and not think that everybody else is going to actually follow that, or we can't change people. Speaking from experience, coming from the global south, that is not the case.
Mm-hmm.
There is a significant influence you can have by exuding and showing your passion in conservation. You can change mindsets. And therefore, I wish that you'd actually structured your talk. This is not criticizing, but just to kind of like advise for future reference.
Thank you.
You'd actually, structure the talk to cater for all people from all walks of life. But however, I still congratulate you for what you've talked about. And I still believe, I remain with the truth that zoos are basically there to entertain us as humans out in the north here. And that has been proven year in and year out. Sorry to burst the bubble.
Thanks, Manny, for your thoughts. And I think, absolutely, sharing enthusiasm is a good thing. All of those things that I maybe took pot shots at are not bad things, and I know that in lots of instances, I mean, there are people that say to me as well, I mean, I've been accused of too much enthusiasm over the years, and I've had people say to me, oh, your enthusiasm is infectious, as long as it's also linked with things that people can do. So once you've got that, people going, oh, I want to help as well, it has to be then followed through with an action. Oh, here's what you can do to help. So whatever we do, whichever method we use, which is appropriate for whatever audience, always the action. People want to know what they can do. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Manny. And I can see that Keith Lindsay's hand up as well.
Yes, hello. I mean, I'm a newcomer to this group, I suppose, but Simon, I thought it was a fascinating talk, and your analysis of the failings of the kind of conventional conservation model and fundraising was I think spot on. I think towards 2/3 the way through your talk, when you turn to the role of zoos, I would beg to differ in a major way, and I share some of the comments of the other people that I think the zoos, some zoos, and you talked about the better zoos, and so I don't know what percent of that there it is, but I would propose that it's a small percentage, are trying to reinvent themselves and trying to find new ways to do things along the lines that you suggest. You may maverick voice in pull the a more activist role in addressing some of these really important issues you mentioned. I think that, you know, we're getting to the point where, and it was interesting, I was in a meeting today that was chaired by the Conservation Planning Specialist Group, which had started in the late 90s as the conservation breeding, the captive breeding specialist group. So they have moved from captive breeding to conservation planning. And when you get it, and they're doing great planning, but none of that requires, and none of what you have said requires, keeping tropical or Arctic animals in captivity in our temperate zoos. And although the zoos are making considerable effort to improve conditions and spending considerable amounts of money to do so for these animals, they really are not suited to living in our latitude. The conservation breeding that does happen is now being done most effectively in the range countries where the animals live. So I would like to propose a possibility that zoos might evolve towards this activist educational role, social enlightenment role, and gradually phase out the keeping of these exotic animals and just do a really useful thing in creating awareness for all these important issues that you mentioned. None of them, a good day out with a family doesn't need tigers pacing up and down, or elephants bobbing their heads, or gorillas or baboons performing acts of self-abuse. It's pardon me, but it's past time for these kind of animal collections, and I think it's now the time for this kind of very important role that you mentioned of bringing people to an understanding of what the important issues are. I mean, thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith. And it's interesting. I'm going to be fascinated to look back at the chat, because it's gone that way. But I'm kind of picking up here that there's been obviously lots of discussion about the ethics of zoos and whether zoos should exist or not. I suppose I was what I've tried to do, or what I wanted to do in this talk and this sharing today, was to almost kind of go, well, if zoos exist, this is what they should be doing to earn their keep, rather than this being a kind of debate on the ethics of zoos and which animals should be kept in zoos, etc. I mean, everyone will have their own individual views on that. But I think what I was trying to say is, you know, if a thing that is a zoo with there are exotic animals, and I mean, Healesville Sanctuary in Australia, I mean, they just look after Australian wildlife. You know, you could imagine a UK zoo just looking after UK wildlife, for example. I don't know. So I mean, that's a whole other talk and debate that we could have, and maybe that's been going on in the background while I've been speaking, I don't know, is just like, should zoos exist or not? I suppose what I was taking as my premise is, at the moment they do, and millions of people visit them, but what they need to do is to be thinking really carefully about what they're doing and how they're doing it in order to have the best and most immediate and quickest impact that we can on biodiversity conservation. Because if they don't, they are certainly, you know, even if, like I said, some people think they're anachronistic already, but they certainly will be very soon if they don't step up and do all of these other things as well, is my view.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. I'm also aware that we're getting close to 7:30 now. So we've got one more question in the group chat, and then I don't know whether we should wrap up unless anyone has any really desperate questions they want to fit into the discussion as well. So we've got, hi, what role or influence do you think science communications have within wildlife conservation? And that's from Bella.
So science communication, this is a very interesting one. I think it depends. I think lots of science communication that I've seen, and I'm willing to have, I mean, I love the fact that so many people turned up at this, and I'd love to have you all in a room together where we could, and lots of hours we could debate all this. because I'm just making some assumptions. Lots of the science communication that I've seen and is often taught is about almost goes in for the informed consumer model. Is we need to get over as many scientific concepts as we can and give people all of the, you know, the intellectual capacity to be able to make the right decisions on things, to understand how things work, etc. You know, to understand all about climate change so that they can make rational decisions. I think it has a very important place. I mean, there's so much brilliant science communication that goes on these days. But I think the science of the social science of using communication as a tool for creating action is a bit different to standard science communication. They absolutely have overlap and absolutely are fields that need to learn from each other. But I think, yeah, my own view and perception of it at the moment is science communication is usually on the getting over information in as exciting and simple way as possible for the informed consumer approach, rather than necessarily understanding the drivers of human behavior and encouraging, nudging them, enabling them, celebrating them, doing the things we all want them to do. So I think they're related, but slightly different.
Absolutely. So I think we've just got one last question. I can see that DJ's hand is up, and then we're gonna have to wrap it up, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Sophie. I was wondering if I could like squeeze in one very last question, which was similar to what you just said about science communication. Thank you for that very interesting talk. So I'm DJ, I'm from the Belgian focal point for the IUCN, and I work at a science policy interface. So I guess in a lot of the work that we do, all of the experts, and this is the dog, and our own wildlife here, home wildlife, a lot of the experts that we deal with are conservation experts dealing with biological sciences, ecology, environmental sciences. And very recently, well, it's not a recent concept, but I guess last week when I was at a talk on the last IPCC assessment cycle, there was a lot of chatter about bringing in experts from the social sciences, and how this is an important time now for getting top level social science expertise also on board and looking into this matter of wildlife conservation or climate change. I was just wondering what your take was on that, and if you think we should be doing this, how would we kind of break down the silos and bring together these two fields?
Yes, I think absolutely we should be doing it. I think getting social science being involved, and I think actually social scientists have been involved quite a bit in climate change, more than they have been in biodiversity conservation. That's coming to the game more recently, and I think it's crucial. You know, you can get governments together to set policy on, you know, on the science and on the decisions that need to be taken, and particular deadlines that need to be met, and rates of. I was thinking about this earlier on, actually, whether the framing of what we've set out for climate change is right. It's, you know, it's all about reducing the rate of emission of something by a certain date. Actually, what's really important is the amount of gases that are in the atmosphere, and we've got kind of a certain amount, and then we've blown it. So it's all about framing and understanding, if we're going to get everyone at every level to not just set targets which we might miss, but actually act, get going on it. That's all about social science. It has to be. So I'm a big believer in it. I mean, I joined the zoo years ago because I was interested in wildlife, and that's my passion, is wildlife. But more and more and more with all of these things, I've just come to my own conviction that whether it's biodiversity conservation or health benefits or climate change or whatever, it's all about people and what people do. So it's social science from top to bottom, through and through, needs to be in there.
Absolutely, and that's something that I know I share a passion in as well. I've recently moved more into the social sciences, and the interdisciplinarity of it all is just, we need so many more people who care both about ecology and social, environmental psychology, the economy, and understanding of how everything links together, and to try and work towards reaching those targets, to do everything more sustainably all together. And that's the big question, isn't it? So I will quickly share in the chat box the link for the website where you can all get the recording. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for this fascinating discussion. And I'm glad it could raise so many important questions. I'm sure everyone's going to be leaving with a lot to think about. So if you've enjoyed this webinar, please do join us for our next one in late June. Details will be released on our socials, and you can follow us by searching IUCN NCUK or joining as a CEC member for free email updates. And Simon, if you'd like to, I don't know if you'd like to share your contact details again in case anyone wants to reach out to you personally.
Yes, the best thing to do is actually find me through LinkedIn. I can. I'm just scrolling right back to the beginning of the presentation, and I can share the screen again just because it's got my LinkedIn.
Yeah, and we'll do our best to share any links that people have, links to websites and so on that people have shared in the chat.
Why don't I just put my LinkedIn details in the chat, and then I can work out how to do it.
Well, we'll be happy to, we can share those with so we'll be uploading the recording to our YouTube channel and onto the website as well. If anyone does want to get in contact again to have their images removed or any sort of personal data, we're happy to do that. So we will give 2 working days before we upload the recording. That will be available on our website, which is IUCN-NC.UK. That's shared in the chat there.
Right, I've just worked out how to do it. I'm just putting my, it's coming out very small for some reason. Well, there we go. I think that worked.
There you go. We'll also try and email round. If everyone has shared their email through the Eventbrite registration, we can send those recordings as well once they're available. So thank you all.
Can I just say thank you so much for everyone joining in, and I hope I have provoked some thought. That purpose was to basically let's just have a think and think about this differently, and people will agree and disagree with bits, but I hope it's been thought-provoking. And if you do want to reach out and share any great examples or things that you've got, things that you disagree with, absolutely, I'm always up for learning new things as well and finding out what's going on. So please do reach out to me and share. I'd love to converse. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think we've had some great inputs and great links shared. So that brings us to the end of our recording. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a lovely evening.